So, hi everyone. Welcome back to the Hidden Opponents Coaches and Professionals programming. This December, we're going to be talking about when to have a conversation with your student athletes and when it's kind of appropriate or something that you should handle as a coach or an athletic administrator or support staff, versus when you should refer that student athlete to a mental health professional, counseling, whatever that may be. So, if the three of you want to introduce yourselves, that would be great. So, Kelly, if you want to start.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Kelly Hee. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have my own private practice in both California and Hawaii. And I'm also currently just a mental health therapist for the University of Hawaii Athletics Department at Manoa.
I love that. Katie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so my name is Katie Harris, and I'm a licensed professional counselor associate in the state of Texas. I have a partnership with a few universities around, but I am also a former athletic trainer. So I was practicing for about a little over 10 years in that setting and just was like, I'm not equipped enough to handle mental health needs for student athletes. And so that's kind of what transitioned me into the counseling profession now. So I work at a private practice now, primarily with the athlete population.
I'm excited to hear your perspective with the athletic training part of it too.
Awesome. I'm happy to share it.
Leah?
Hi, I'm Leah Jantzen. I am from New York and I am a mindset and performance coach, but I'm also a high school guidance counselor. So I have a master's in school counseling. And I also have a private business where I do mindset and professional coaching for athletes. I'm a 3-time Ironman and multiple marathon runner. And I started using the strategies that I was using in my racing and bringing it to people to help them perform better and learn how to incorporate that into their racing. But then it's my school. I was a varsity volleyball coach for years and started doing mindset work and mental health work with with my team. And then now this year, for the first time, they just hired me as the mental health and performance coach for all student athletes at Ward Melville High School. And it's like the first one of its kind that I know of anywhere in this area. So I am, really excited to bring this to every team and every varsity player and just be someone they can come to and be a support for the coaches and the parents and the student athletes as well.
Awesome. So we have a lot of different perspectives, but a lot of similar perspectives. So I know I'm really excited to hear from the three of you. So I guess let's start with kind of the bare bones of it. Who are the different people and what are the different roles that should or could be involved in a conversation about mental health? So who in an athletic setting do you think should be involved in that conversation? Katie, if you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because it's all about a team, right? Like who's in your corner is kind of my approach when I work with student athletes. And so it can be anywhere from the coaches to the athletic training staff to teammates to a professor that the student really connects with. I think obviously the team physician is a very important component of that. Certain administrators, operations, you never know, like the connections and rapport that student athletes have, whether that's with the equipment managing staff or something like that. So I think it's just a matter of who's in your corner. I love this approach because a lot of people have eyes on student athletes. And so if a teacher sees an athlete, but their grades are kind of failing, hey, I know who's in their corner. I can go talk to somebody else, or especially from an athletic training background, having that kind of relationship with student athletes was really important to me because then I could talk to their position coach, or I could talk to, hey, strength coach, did you notice something, was up with so-and-so? I just wanted to check in. And so I think there's a lot of people, and I don't think it's limited to that, because then it's family and friends, then it's a significant other, then it just kind of domino keeps going. But I think establishing a rapport with whatever role you have, and then kind of figuring out, hey, who's in your corner? Who are your roommates? Who are you living with? So I think it can be endless, to be honest.
So then to kind of ping pong off that, Kelly, I'll jump to you. So for different people in these different roles, whether you have athletics or university housing or professors, like Katie was saying, what are your kind of cues that you see where if I'm coaching and I see a student athlete struggling, how do I know when to bring that to an athletic trainer's attention? Or if I'm a professor, how do I know when to bring that to a coach's attention?
Yeah, it's a good question. You're kind of asking when do I pass the baton a little bit? How do I know when to share this information? And honestly, what I kind of was thinking of this myself is I actually asked a coach that I was working with really closely, like, hey, when do you know how to do this? And her answer was so perfect. She said, you can never do it too soon. Like, I love, Katie, that you brought up, it's a team mentality, because like coaches, you have a team too, right? Like the support staff are a team, the players have a team, even in individual sports. So the ability, or actually the way that I would kind of rephrase that question is like, why would you not, communicate it to people? Like, what harm would it do? Because there are scenarios, obviously, that, you don't need to share like who so-and-so's dating. But, to think about like, okay, would it be helpful if the trainer knows that, this person has been, you know, having struggles with sleep? Yes, of course, because that's going to probably like hurt her physically in her recovery time. And so like kind of using this mentality of like, why not do it early so that people can, as the coaching staff or, the support staff, actually can support each other much better and easier,
I love that you can never do it too soon. And I think that's a really good point. So Leah, in that sense, if we have, for example, a coach talking to a strength coach about maybe not getting enough sleep, when do you think the strength coach or whoever it may be, whatever the situation is, when do you think it's kind of their cue to jump in and actually have that conversation versus being aware of that information and looking out for that student athlete?
So you mean when should they talk to a mental health professional about it or keep it to themselves? Is that what you're asking? Like,
kind of like if I'm that strength coach and I know that an athlete's struggling with sleep, if I want to approach the athlete with it, when should I do it versus when should I sit on that information and just be aware of it? Or if I already had that conversation, when should I maybe bring a professional mental health person into it?
I think like Katie had said before, the whole concept of a team, it's a team approach, and the athletes have a team that they can go to. But also the coaches have to be, in a sense, like, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but sometimes they can be like, oh, I can handle this, or, we can just deal with this on the team. It doesn't need to go to anyone else. And I think that sometimes, as a coach myself, it's like, oh, we got this, we can deal with it, or I'll help her. And I think that's, that can be a blind spot for coaches. And I think, if they have someone that they know is available, that they trust, like, they can say to me, Leah, I've got this kid, I don't know what to do. Like, I've talked to her, but she's struggling. They're confident enough as coaches to pass the baton and say, I have a qualified person on staff who I trust with my team that I can now bring in, or go to and refer to. But I think there's still, again, the whole point of a hidden opponent is that to address the stigma in sports culture that it's a sign of weakness. And I think, unfortunately, this applies to some of the coaches too. I think they feel like it's a weakness to ask for help. And that is what this is all about. This conversation is like, if the coaches can model the behavior of, I'm going to someone to get help, then they show the athletes, like, this is just what we do here. This is how this team works. We do whatever we need to do to help everyone. I get help as the coach, you get help as the athlete. This is just what we do. So I really have no idea if I answered your question, Mary. I have no idea what it was, but I just kind of went with it. But I think it's creating a culture within that team approach, that there's an athletic trainer on board, there's the strength coach, there's this coach, there's the mental health coach. That's just part of the team. And we're here to take care of you in every way we can. I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to help you with your strength and conditioning, but I can help you talk about getting more sleep and putting boundaries on your life and focusing on what it is you want to accomplish while you're out there.
I love the point that you said about coaches kind of going, oh, well, I can handle this. And I think a lot of coaches, myself included, can sometimes be guilty of that. And I love what you said about, being confident to kind of pass the baton, and going back to what Katie said, knowing your athletes and knowing who they connect with and who they can trust. Because, sometimes as a coach, I think we always want all of our athletes to trust us, where we may have closer relationships, and that's just the nature of human relationships with certain athletes, where other athletes may go to another coach on staff, and that's okay. As long as we know that they're going to somebody on staff, that's what matters the most.
I just want to chime in, Mary. When I speak to my athletes, I say to them, find your person. If it's me, great. that's awesome. If it's not me, that's okay too. Have your go-tos. Who are they on your team? Who are the adults that you know you can go to? I'd love it to be me, but I understand it may not be, but that's perfectly fine. You don't need to be forced to come to someone you're not comfortable with, because I agree with you. Sometimes your players have better relationships with you, and sometimes they want to go to the trainer and talk to her, and I'm great. Like, I'm all for it. But if we show them as coaches that we're good with it, that we're not going to take offense to that, because they're worried about pleasing the coach. They don't want to do anything but please coach. So it's like it's so important as coaches to model that behavior for the student athletes. I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in.
No,
Awesome.
100%.
Oh, I was going to jump in real quick too, just from an athletic trainer perspective, because a few athletic trainers that I worked with were always nervous about like a HIPAA thing of like, oh, should I share this information? Is this confidential? And so any athletic trainers out there listening is like, part of this team is the student athlete. Like, we can't forget that individual as well. And so asking the student athlete, hey, is there someone you feel comfortable with me sharing this with, like including them, because that allows the athletic trainer to obviously operate within their HIPAA guidelines or whatever that looks like, if it's injury related or whatnot, but it also brings the student athlete into the conversation versus about the conversation. And so for all those athletic trainers out there, just like take a deep breath, operate with student athlete kind of first. That's kind of the approach that I've used before, and just bringing them into the conversation.
I think that's a really important point that you just made. And it not only brings the student athlete into the conversation, but it gives them the power in that conversation too, which I think is really important. So now we've established kind of who's in this conversation, who should we get involved, how should we approach it? So, and I know that I think we talked about this last month a little bit, but like the kind of stigma on college campuses that, there's a 3-week long waiting period at counseling centers and that it's not accessible. So for anyone kind of going, okay, if I as a coach get someone come to me who says I'm struggling with my mental health, and I go, okay, go to the counseling center. When is the time for that versus when is the time, like, should you just send someone straight to the counseling center, or should you yourself talk to them first? Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, it's very hard because obviously the counseling center is there, I think, at all schools, but also it's there for the entire academic population. Whereas the athletic center, hopefully you'd have one just for them, because there's hundreds of kids in athletic department. And so you kind of get a little bit more of like a context, right? Instead of saying like, go over to these people who don't know that sport is actually a culture in its own right. Who don't understand that, like the background behind it, like hopefully to have somebody like, one of the three of us who understand both mental health as well as the sport itself, and even along the lines to kind of like the physical training and all of that stuff, so you have more context of like practice in your scope. But I think going back to the idea that like you can never do it too soon, because the stigma, I think we are all part of it in ways that we don't even notice it. Like I know when we said like, oh, if you need help, like, well, help, of course the coaches are gonna be like, oh, I don't need help, I have a winning mentality. So even if we start to kind of change the words, like if we want improvement, if we want, like to just really try to shift the focus as like this being a negative and it turning into like a self-improvement, a positive direction, or even just a neutral direction. Because you're right, like if somebody says like, oh, thank you for telling me your deepest, darkest vulnerabilities, go that way. And it feels like they're being passed off, and we don't want that as support staff, and we don't want them to feel like that either. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it feels like the earlier on, the better, so that everyone is already kind of like building and supporting this person just more naturally and gradually.
And I think the point you made about the athletic specific kind of understanding within that culture and having that context of athletics is super important. And I know that, there are some schools out there who don't have mental health professionals in their athletics department, whether that be because they're too small, they don't have it in their budget, whatever the reason, and whatever level it may be at, high school to Division I or professional. What are some alternatives? Leah, I'll jump to you. What are some alternatives that you think those staffs could kind of take advantage of, whether that be mental health, training, or whatever it is, so that they can have the same kind of skill set that a mental health professional on staff would have, but as a staff as a whole, if that makes sense.
You mean like the coaches? What can they have
Yeah.
that's training? Yeah, I think they can benefit from a training. If the school can't afford to have a counseling center on site for athletes specifically, because I agree with Kelly, like it's really hard for, sport is its own culture, and people don't like, if I have an injury and I go to my doctor, they're like, oh, go see this guy. He gets runners. He understands. He'll get you. Like, otherwise they don't understand us. Like it's a different mentality. And I think that's what makes our job so special and unique, is that we speak that language. So finding someone that they can go to, whether that person exists in the town that they're in, but I think if coaches had other referrals on in their hands, that they could say, hey, because when you said before, if they go to their coach and say, I need help, and it's a 3-week wait at a counseling center, that upsets me. Like that, and in that 3 weeks time, they could meet with someone who doesn't understand what they're struggling with. That's scary. That's what we need to address. So maybe if the coaches had a training that they could probably address a large percentage of the issues that their athletes are going through. Many of them are not life-threatening. They're struggling. They're not sleeping. They're not eating. They're stressed. They're anxious about performing. They want to do well. They want to play well. They don't want to lose their scholarship, whatever it may be. There should be specific, and I know there is training out there for coaches to just at least address the initial issue. But then if it does go further, having a list of local referrals, or even online, like work that I do. I work with athletes one-on-one. I mean, just to have people they can say, hey, meet with Leah, meet with, with Kelly, meet with Katie, or whatever. Someone, it could be a Zoom, anything, because if a kid asks for help, they really want it. Like, that's what I've learned. I mean, most of the time they're not going to say anything. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. If they're saying I'm not fine, we need to be able to have someone that they can speak to. They don't differentiate. They don't care whether you're a coach or you have a PhD in counseling. They just want to be heard. They just want someone to listen to them. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, Mary, but I said a lot.
I think if I can jump in for a second, I think, Leah, you bring up a really good point that like some people get stuck on the mental health, like therapist or, whatever it is, the counselor, the title, and they think, oh, crisis or depression diagnoses, like those kind of things. But it's just like a coach, like that we have a very wide span of things that we can do. And those trainings can come from kind of natural psychoeducation from the therapist or, whoever it is, if they're working like a collaborative team. So those like formal trainings that, schools have to pay for, all these things really can be decreased if we're working together as a team. Because I'm sure whether it's you and your skills based or your, mental skills or counseling guidance, like all of those things, there's so much you can do both with the students themselves as well as the supporting staff.
And Leah, you kind of touched on coaches being able to handle athletes when they're struggling versus when they're in crisis. So Katie, if you had to kind of differentiate between, a coach is dealing with an athlete who's struggling versus they get an athlete who's in crisis, what are some of the different signs between struggling versus crisis when coaches should go, okay, I think I can handle this, versus I need to get them help with a professional?
Really good question. And I mean, my personal philosophy is like, is it affecting their activities of daily living? Like, is their eating decreasing? Is their sleeping decreasing? Are they isolating? Is their hygiene going down? Those are your like small indicators to me of like, okay, let's say an athlete just had a season-ending injury and they're just sad, because I would be sad. Like that's a sad thing to happen. So let's monitor them, but they're still eating, they're still socializing with their team, they're still getting some sleep, they're still coming to treatment, post-surgery, spirits are still good, but just bummed. Okay, that's something to kind of look, you could probably link arms with that. But if you start noticing like, oh, they're isolating from the team, oh, they're staying in the training room a little bit longer and not going to team meals. But I say this all with like an asterisk of a caveat, because I always think it's better to front load anyway. Like, hey, I know this is going to be a really hard transition for you. I have some resources if this gets hard. So front loading the conversation, making it more normalized to begin with versus waiting to crisis. And obviously that's my athletic trainer injury perspective. We never know with grief or accidents or deaths or something like that happens. So I think front loading the conversation first, team meetings, let everybody kind of know hey, these are some resources that we have in the community. But as a coach or as a support staff, I think looking for those daily activity things, I think also distress level. So if an athlete comes in and they're just super distressed, something really elevated them, hey, let's take some deep breaths. Tell me what's going on. Okay, how can I support you? Asking that question. Maybe they're like, I don't know. And we're like, okay, let's find someone that might know. So kind of hand holding that transition. And then obviously the big indicator is harm towards self or others. So if an athlete comes in and they're expressing that, to me, that's more level crisis of like, okay, let's get someone kind of trained in assessments, kind of figure things out. What really do you need? So those are my three things, is like activities of daily living, distress level, and then self-harm or suicidal thoughts, and then kind of going from there. I hope that was clear.
I think it was. And I feel like you made that extremely digestible, where a lot of times coaches and support staff or whoever it may be in that position can kind of be thinking, what are the list of symptoms and what are the list of warning signs? And you may be thinking for specific ones where what you said was really easy. Does it affect daily living? Yes or no? It's just straight up. And you kind of touched on when you were saying about front loading with resources. Kelly, I'll jump to you for this one. So with front loading with resources, how important do you think it is? And we all kind of touched on this, of being proactive rather than reactive in a crisis. But what do you think the importance is where, a wellness center or the athletics mental health resources on campus or in the department, whatever it may be, gets involved, early in the year, early in the season, during preseason, and become part of that conversation early so that student athletes have that touch point before something happens?
Yeah, super important. I think it honestly might be one of the strongest impacts to normalize that, to make it accessible, so that like Katie's saying, like if I'm going to front load it, I don't have to explain to them what a counselor does or who or where to find them. Like it's already, like what we want to do in the end is cut down any barriers to treatment and barriers to access, right? And so even if I were to say, hey, go across campus and go to the counseling center, it doesn't seem like it, but like that's a barrier. Somebody's going to be like, no, I'm depressed, I don't want to do that. That doesn't feel good. And so us being able to say, like, you already have Kelly's number, you already know where Leah's office is, you already have a standing appointment with her, like these things I think are so important to just like have that face and name out there, so that it does not feel like this giant leap when somebody's already in a place where they feel kind of like, like not capable of doing just your daily functioning things, right? Like their meter is already maxed out to red.
I'm just going to add to what Kelly said, like having the coaches again understand, oh yeah, the counseling center, I send athletes there all the time. I've had athletes in the past that struggled, then they went over there. If you could have like a situation that you could share with an athlete, like, oh, last year or 3 years ago, I sent an athlete to the counseling center and they had a really good experience. They met with so-and-so who they can actually say they know, or they've been there. It again, it sets it up. It again, lowers that the barrier, gets rid of some of the barriers. Because I agree with you, Kelly. It's like, oh, I have to make an appointment, I have to call, or I have to go over there. I don't think so. I'm just going to go home and do my thing, which could be, again, like Katie said, isolating. I'm good. I just want to be by myself. I'm just going to binge, whatever. But if we have to almost, serve it up on a silver platter. Oh yeah, you're going to meet with Katie. She's awesome. She totally gets it. She was a swimmer in college, or, whatever the case may be. We have to be able to give it to them and really serve it up on that silver platter, and just talk about a situation we had as a coach. Oh yeah, way back when the more we normalize it, like Kelly said, the more we normalize it. Oh, I went to the counseling center when I was a freshman, and it was, I was having a really hard time transitioning. Really? You coach? Yeah, totally. Like it was a bad time, whatever that situation. And they're like, oh, okay. And again, read your athlete. The athlete that wants that sort of warm and fuzzy. And the athlete that's like, listen, you got to do what you got to do. Like, take care of you. And I need you back on the field. Like another athlete may say it, we may want to hear it that way, but that's where the coaches, they're so important in this. And they're the pivotal point where this can kind of go one way or the other. If they can, sell it, so to speak. But like Kelly also referenced, the beginning of the season, it has to just be part of it. It's just the norm. This is just what we do. Oh, this is how it works here. Yeah, this is how it works here. And it's just like, that's it. No one asks any questions. And they kind of look around and go, oh, okay. I think that's an important piece that is so critical, especially when they first join, that lay the foundation for it. And then it becomes part of the culture.
And I think both of you touched on a super important point, how the strongest impact to break the stigma is normalizing that. And I think something I think about with, last academic year, there were a lot of student athlete deaths by suicide that were publicized. And I think coaches may have reacted to that news and then had that conversation with their teams rather than having that conversation in preseason before something happened to drive that conversation. So I don't know if any of you want to add to that. You can or you can't, completely up to you. But that was just something that I kind of thought of while the both of you were speaking about that.
Yeah, I'll jump first. I think we all kind of have something to say about that topic because it was so, I mean, even for mental health professionals who we know suicide is a very common thing, unfortunately, but to have like how many were publicized and how many was out there last year was really just jaw-dropping and scary and, devastating. And I know just from personal experience, even the aftermath of like, hey, you guys are in the same sport, you may have known these people, like, can we, talk to the some of the players on the team just to see how they're doing. And there was a big fear in coaches of like, it's almost like sex ed, like if you talk about it, then it's going to happen. It's like, no, talking about it isn't going to make somebody do it, but like not talking about it is going to make that more likely. And I think that's a huge fear, that like crisis versus kind of just regular mental health, is coaches commonly fear, if I send these athletes there, then like, what if I lose them? What if their mental health is now put like kind of on a platter and they can't come back? Whereas before they were able to just function with some issues. And so I've noticed like that stood out to me as such a big deal of, oh, there needs to be a lot more education. Like talking about depression isn't going to make somebody more depressed. It isn't going to make somebody more suicidal. In fact, it's quite the opposite, but there's such a misunderstanding about that in kind of like common, sport culture, unfortunately. I don't know if your guys has had a similar experience or perspective at all.
No, I agree with you, Kelly. I see it a lot. I work in a high school and I see a lot with teachers in the classroom. They don't want to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about it. They feel ill-equipped to talk about it. We had a student commit suicide last spring and it was out of nowhere devastating. He was not on anyone's radar, any of the social workers or psychologists, and the teachers didn't even know how to handle it. And the kids, a few teachers did mention it in class and talked about it. And the kids came up to us and were like, thank you, Mr. So-and-so, for talking about it. Why not? Why isn't anyone talking about it? There's a fear, I think, that they just don't feel equipped to do it. But I think there's less they need to know. They don't need to be a mental health professional to be compassionate. There's a difference. And I think that's, you go into education, you go into coaching because you love kids and you love to work with young people. So let that be the driver of the way you present. If you're open and honest with kids, whether they're high school or college, that's all they want to see. They just want an open, free, safe place to have a conversation. And unfortunately, they had them after the fact, but you know what, Mary, it's better than not at all. But again, hindsight is 2020. If everybody had conversations at the beginning of the season, yeah, that would be ideal. And I think we're getting there. Conversations like this are helpful. The more we talk about it, like you said, Kelly, it doesn't make it happen more often. It just makes us more educated and more accustomed to hearing these words and phrases. And if we're more accustomed to it, then the kids and the athletes will feel it from us. They'll be like, oh, we can speak freely here. And the more freely they speak, the more likely they are to ask for help and get that help.
Yeah, I will echo both Kelly and Leah on both of those things. And I think something that, especially working with like administration or coaches, is like, I don't know what to say. And it's like, you don't really have to say anything. Sometimes it's just listening to hear and not to respond, and then saying, yeah, I don't understand either. It's kind of sitting on the bench with them, sitting next to them through it, versus like having to have the answers or know what to say, because it's vicarious trauma, right? So it's someone else experiencing something because of what someone else went through. And so when we see this news article, when we see another suicide that happens, like it affects many communities. And so sometimes it's just sitting together and listening to what everyone else is processing through, and then working through with that of like, oh, okay, maybe we need to have more discussions like this. Maybe we need to have essentially a group therapy session and have a therapist come in and like, let's bounce some ideas and let's process some of this. And so I think that's sometimes what I hear a lot of fears of coaches and administrators of like, I don't know what to say. Well, don't say anything. Say, I hear you. Man, I know that's hard. It's getting me too, right? It's just kind of validating some of those emotions and those fears. And I think that can be a beautiful space for coaches and any support staff to sit in with, even with their own experiences and their own feelings, and within a coaching staff, having that conversation of like, I don't know what to do either. And that's okay. I think sometimes in the sports world, we got to know like, what's the next play? How do we make things, how do we, make moves happen? And what's our strategy? And it's like, sometimes in this world, we don't have to have that. Sometimes we just have to slow down and see what pieces are on the table and then decide what to do next.
Being vulnerable, just being vulnerable as a coach, just saying like, guys, I don't have any answers. I'm sad too. I feel like you feel. I don't know what to say. I'm at a loss for words. It's devastating. It's sad. And then let's talk about it. Let them, let them lead the conversation. But I had kids come to me last year and said like their coach didn't talk about what happened at school. That coach never discussed it on the team. And the kids are like, we're crying, and the coach is like, business as usual. And that's part of they're like, it's better to get things back to normal as soon as possible. I hear that a lot. Let's get things back to normal for them. They'll be better off if we get back to normal. Yes, in most instances, as you guys know, it's good to get routine back and have them being back to, but without taking a pause, just a pause to reflect and acknowledge what the tragedies that have happened. It's like, that's a human. If they don't see you as human, as a coach or a teacher, then they're like, wow, she doesn't get it. She's just pushing on and ignoring it. Like that sits with them. They pick up on that. And this is a generation that wants to know why. They want to know why everything. They want answers. They don't just say, okay, that's just what we're going to do because that's what we're going to do. Like back in my day, this is no, what we want to talk about it. So I think it's important to it doesn't have to be a long, lengthy conversation. It's just a pause. Like, hey, let's talk about this. And then explain to them, we're going to talk about it for 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to go back to practice. But if you guys need a moment, I'm here for it. Like, you just let me know. I think that's huge, Mary. That's like a big, that's a gesture to them that you're compassionate human that does not have the answers. You say as a coach, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a coach. That's what I know. But I can bring somebody in if you guys want that, or we can just have a discussion. And most of the time they just want to talk.
Well, I think what you're saying is take risks, right? Like, unfortunately, it does come down in some ways to administration, and, coaches' jobs are on the line, unfortunately. Like that I would never want to be in that position because it sounds so stressful. And so they have their own stuff, that they're trying to maneuver and manage and strategize, as coaches do. And what I hear you guys saying is like, well, take risks, because sometimes, like, I think we saw in a couple different schools this last calendar year, where the school and the coach decided we're going to cut the season. And I'm sure there was a huge risk for that coach in his position or her position, but they were vulnerable. Just like you're saying, they're human. They're saying, I'm going to put person ahead of performance here. This is what I need to do. And that's going to be a decision that, the coaches have to make. And there's no clear cut answer, but to make that with others is kind of what I think is the goal, is to get some feedback. Hey, players, do you want to keep playing? Like, hey, trainers, like, are you equipped to keep doing this? Like, let's figure this out together and take that risk.
And I think the three of you touched on a really important kind of aspect of this that goes back to coaching. If you don't have that compassion or build that trust or have those relationships, and I realized this in coaching, if you focus more on the knowledge base and knowing everything and kind of portraying that to your athletes, you're not going to be able to coach them as well. Versus if you're vulnerable and you're compassionate and you build a relationship on trust and you're not afraid to say, I don't know, then you are able to build that relationship, whether it be to help them through mental health things or to coach them better. You'll have a better relationship overall, which I think is really important, just as a holistic human being, not just as an athlete. So kind of pivoting here, say we've had that conversation, whether we're support staff, coach, whoever, and we have a student athlete who we want to get into counseling. What would be the differences in approaching this if the student athlete is okay with and is in favor of going to counseling versus if they're opposed to it? Hard line, do not want to go. Katie, I'll start with you.
Ooh, this is a good one. Well, I think one with the student athlete that's all for it is still encouraging it, right? Because it's taking that step that schedules the appointment. It's going. And so encouraging and then saying, hey, how did it go? Do you feel like it's a good fit for you? Because one thing I know is like not every therapist is the right fit for every client or student athlete, but I also know resources are limited. So I think really kind of normalizing that conversation, and that's probably a whole different podcast, but I think having the conversation to support them through that. And then the student athlete that's resistant is identifying what are your barriers? Like, is it you're afraid coach will find out and your playing time is going to decrease? Is it because your parents told you that if you went, then something's wrong with you? Like, let's have a conversation, because one, based on this scenario, is they're already confiding in you that something's going on. So using that relationship, to work on those things without even being a counselor. Hey, I didn't want to go to therapy my first time. It was crazy. Or I went one time and I didn't like it. And then I met with someone else. And so kind of normalizing the process. I think something, if an athlete is very resistant, is like, okay, well, what can we do to support you? Asking them that question, bringing them into that conversation once again is, hey, I heard you were struggling with depression. I know you don't want to see anybody. So what does that look like to monitor X, Y, and Z? What does support look like for you since you've expressed this to me? Because then it kind of helps them, I don't know, ease into it. And I don't want to speak for all student athletes, but it kind of allows them like a crack in the door to be like, man, support just looks like someone that's a listening ear. Great. I have the time and capacity to be your listening ear. But under the understanding, if this gets a little bit more in depth or out of my lane, would you be willing to talk to someone further? You know, opening that conversation for them is like, yeah, you can trust me and I'm not going to promise anything, but I am going to be transparent and I am going to be honest with you. And I think that's the kicker for those student athletes that don't want it, but are really craving it.
I think that's a really good point of having that transparency and that openness and that honesty in that conversation. And I don't know if you could call it setting boundaries, but kind of setting boundaries to say, okay, this is as far as I can kind of take you, and this is where I'll be here for you. But if you get into this area, then we need to explore other avenues. And I really like the fact that you mentioned not pushing it on them and letting them kind of come into it on their own. So now, Kelly, if you have an athlete who is in counseling, should a coach keep checking up on them, or should a coach kind of let the mental health professional take full reign and not interfere, quote unquote, with that process?
I think the answer is probably as clear as mud. Like, it depends, right? Like some of the coaches some of the athletes want that check-in, right? They have that kind of relationship, or they want the coach just to acknowledge like, hey, you're still going, is everything okay? Or hey, do you like her? Rather than feeling like, oh, I pushed it off to a mental health therapist, now we don't ever have to talk about it, right? Where you have your other mix of people who, you know, like maybe they want that to be very sacred and they don't even want their coach to know that they're still going beyond the time that they were requested. Like, it really depends. And I think that's where the coaches, like, one of the big responsibilities of the coaches is to know their players and know the difference, and, you know, and really kind of assess the scenario. Like, if you have a player who's drinking or smoking weed or doing something where you're already breaking team rules, but they're obviously trying to support the player to keep playing, we're kind of saying like, okay, like, how can I make sure you're getting, you know, you're doing better, you're improving, but also not feel like I'm the police and not feel like I'm punishing you. Like, I want to be able to support you. And that would be very different than, you know, your player who is struggling with the grief of a friend who passed away or breaking up with their partner or something like that. And so it really does have a lot to do with the coach being able to like kind of know context and assess what the needs are based on that individual.
I think that's really important. And then we've all talked about it kind of tonight. Coaches inherently kind of have that therapist role, or they will be that person that athletes will come to in some point. So Leah, I'll jump to you for this one. What there's a lot in this question, so get ready. What would constitute too much for a coach to handle? What are kind of the topics that would be them staying in their lane and where they should be versus, okay, this is too much for me, I need to refer out? Yeah, so what kind of are those two lanes? What do they look like? And when should one lane be crossed into another?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on the coach. A lot of it will depend on the coach. Some coaches are going to feel more comfortable talking about those, those life balance issues. If it's like Katie sort of referenced earlier, how much of it is interfering with their life. That's what I always say. If this anxiety and depression is interfering with your life, it is it's out of control and you need some help. But you're happy as the coach to talk to them about boyfriend, girlfriend issues, or I'm going out too often, I'm partying too much, like, what you feel comfortable as a coach talking about. But when you feel like there's that withdrawal, they're not themselves, they're not hanging out with their friends, they're playing differently, their body language is off. Like, your players, and when, wow, something's up, they seem like they're losing weight, or they're not interacting, or just, I think you can talk about those things, Mary, but I think at some point it's important that they feel from you, like, I want to help you, but I'm not equipped to do that. I have resources, people I know personally that love my athletes as much as I do. Like, it's important that you endorse these people. That's why I said earlier, like, know the counselors you're sending them to. Just pop in there. I don't know what each of your campuses are like, or have someone you refer to all the time. Like, I have people that, I'm not equipped to handle every situation, but there's someone I know I can go to. Oh, you're going to like her. And if you don't, I have other people. Like Katie said, you're not going to click with everyone. But I think staying in your lane, you have to know your lane, like define your lane. This is my lane. This is what I'm good at dealing with substance abuse issues. I'm really good at anxiety and depression, but I'm not good at this or that. I'm not good at self-harm, or if they're cutting, or if they're doing different things. Like, you kind of have to know what your lane is. And maybe you have an assistant coach or someone else on staff that they might have, that might be their lane. They're really good. And the players may go to them anyway. So I think it's a natural, at the beginning of the season or beginning of the year, you have to set up, okay, this is what it's going to look like if there's a crisis, or if there's a kid that's struggling. You already have that flow chart, so to speak, set up. But I think, again, sometimes the need is, we can handle it all. Like, as a coach, like, I can do this, I can handle it, I can take care of it. And then all of a sudden it's crisis mode. And you're like, oh crap, like, now what? Now the kid is really in crisis, and I can't even, they can't assess their own situation because they're too in it. So, you want to be proactive about knowing when it is your limits, when you're going to hit your limits as a coach.
And I think it's a really important point that you made of those lanes depend on who you are as a coach, what your life experiences have been. And if you have assistants who have different life experiences, you all have different lanes that you can cover. I think that's a really important point, so that a student athlete has a lot of support within that team environment that they may not even realize that they have.
Right.
So the last thing I'll ask the three of you, and I'll jump to each of you for this. What are kind of some tips that you would give to coaches to help student athletes with their mental health? So whether that be mindfulness, breath work, integrating mental training with mental health skills, check-ins, what's kind of your go-to, and what's the one that you would recommend to coaches to use with their athletes? So Katie, I'll start with you.
Oh man, there's just so many good things. I love breath work. I mean, kind of what Leah was saying is just taking a pause, sometimes just slowing down. So breathing, but I know some athletes don't like that because then they feel like their thoughts are like flooding their mind. And so actually slowing down is worse for them. And so finding what works. But one of my favorite things, and there was a study done that like kind of just highlighted like what brought people happiness, and it was expressing gratitude and serving others. And so I think any way to express something you're thankful for, or gratitude. And it could be, I'm thankful my shoes didn't come in tight during practice. And that's like at your max capacity. Like you were just having a day and that was the only thing that went right. Then great. Like, let's celebrate that, because kind of reframing these thoughts into gratitude can kind of help transition over time. And then serving others, like helping, like if you're having a bad day, how can you help a teammate today? Like kind of shifting the mindset. Obviously those are not exclusive, and everyone else has a lot of insight. So I could talk about this part forever, but I will pass the baton now.
Leah, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, I think modeling the compassion to hear people. I think if a coach gets a sense that if players get a sense that the coach doesn't believe in mental health, thinks just suck it up and, you know, rub some dirt on it, they get that vibe from coaches right away. And if you can create an environment where it's acceptable to talk about it, like sharing your own struggles if you have them, like opening that door and showing them it's okay. Wow, coach went through it. Okay, and now she's definitely going to be someone who's gonna listen. I tell parents this all the time: have conversations with your kids about if they see that you're open to it and you don't have a bias towards it, then they'll be more likely to share. I love doing visualizations with kids, like having them really look at themselves and assess the situation, like how they're putting themselves out in the world, and having group meetings where the players talk to each other. And I do that with my teams, and they're like, wow, I didn't realize everyone felt this way. I didn't realize my other teammates were also struggling. And when they see, which I think is a powerful exercise, when they don't hear other teammates, they didn't know the teammates were feeling this way. They didn't know their teammates had similar struggles. They're like, their feedback to me is, wow, I feel so much better. I don't feel alone, that I'm the only one struggling with balancing life in school and sports and school. So I think creating just a culture of acceptance and awareness is crucial. And this may take time to cultivate. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think you set it up right away. And then just giving them an opportunity and a safe space once in a while to just to talk if they want to. They don't have, no one's forced to share, no one's forced to do anything. It's just, but again, you send a very clear message when you put time aside for that. They say, wow, this is important to coach. And if it's important to coach, it's important to me, right? Whatever you do, they want you to, whatever coach does, they're in for it. So I think that modeling is a huge, huge piece of it.
And I think what you mentioned about it taking time is really important to acknowledge too. I think a lot of coaches, myself included, can kind of get antsy and want to kind of have that culture and have that environment set and want our athletes to know, you can come to me, like you really can. But it's okay that it's going to take time, because when it finally gets there, then it's a really good place for them to thrive and be. So Kelly, what's the one thing that you would kind of give to coaches to walk away with this from?
I think you can't go wrong adding to your toolkit. So no matter what it is, if it's breath work, it's great. If it's reframing like negative thoughts, it's fantastic. If it's refocusing, mindfulness, all of these things, it's not going to hurt you to educate yourself and maybe even your players more. The modeling, I think that has to do with it, right? Like if I'm going to teach it, I'm going to practice it, hopefully. I think the last thing that I would say is to like the modeling of like being a whole human rather than just an athlete, like to like really model that thought of your life does not begin and end at the blow of this whistle, or whatever the signal of the game is, because you are more than an athlete. And that, I think, like opens this picture of it's more than just like we win or lose. It's more than I played well or I played poorly. Like I can be a great whatever after my sport, and like this is just part of me too. And so I think all of those together, what Katie said, what Leah said, the just addition of mental health skills and education is just like where the direction needs to go.
Mary, can I just add one quick thing? I think there's a lot of options that coaches there's so many things they can do. You can do journaling, you can do breath work, you can do visualization, you can pick one thing, pick one that you feel really comfortable doing and that you do on your own. Like Kelly referenced, like if you do it, if it's in your life practice, then it's something you're comfortable talking about, and be consistent with it. Like pick something that you're going to do routinely, that it's your one thing, and let that be your thing. And then, maybe the following year you add another piece of some kind of mental health training, and then that way it's like you're showing them like, I'm just going to do this and I'm just going to be consistent with this one thing. I'm not going to try and tackle all of these things and throw everything at them, and then they're not going to get anything out of it. They're just going to be like, wait, I thought we were doing, is this breath work? I think that's again, as coaches, we want to try everything, and we're like, we can do it all. And it's like, maybe we can, or maybe we can't. And it's okay if we can't. But then you creating that, back to your Mary, creating the culture, then the years go on and all of a sudden the seniors are now, the freshmen will go to them or say to something, oh, I'm not feeling good. Oh, you can totally tell coach about that. Really? Oh yeah, that's what this is about. And then it organically happens. And it doesn't even have to come from you anymore. You've created that culture on that team. The upperclassmen that's just part of, yeah, this is totally, or go to the captains, like, this is just what we do here. And it's like, it takes some time to get to that point, but the time's going to pass anyway, right? So we might as well make it a priority. But I always say, like, pick 1 or 2 things tops that you want to tackle out of all of the tools in your toolkit, like Kelly said.
Right, like build mastery, right? Like we don't want to know a lot or a little about a lot. Like, let's be great at a few things so that we can like build the mastery on that.
I absolutely love that. So picking one thing, getting mastery and sticking with it. So then that culture kind of evolves on its own, which again, like we said, may take time. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I think it's going to be really beneficial for our community, and I'm really excited for them to hear it. So thank you to the 3 of you for doing this. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your time, and looking forward to what 2023 has in store.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you guys for like the different perspectives too. It's really great to hear all of them, united.
Yeah, thank y'all.